Hey guys, it's Blake. We're back in the garage, and today I'm going to go through some of what I've got in the car here for an electrical system. So since the kind of one of the key points of the electrical system is the Pixie storage container, aka the battery here, I've got an Optima red top. I've been pretty happy with it. I've had mixed luck with Optimas sometimes in the past. This one's been pretty good, I think mostly because I got the fancy schmancy Optima charger that keeps it topped off, and with that, everything seems to be a little bit better behaved. I've tried to run some cheaper chargers and had some kind of bad luck in the past. So, so far so good. You know, we'll keep our fingers crossed. But yeah, so far that's been good. And this is a pretty simple grounding setup. So we come off of here and we ground. This is a, what is that, 1/2-inch bolt that's welded straight to the frame rail, or well, unibody. And then the main ground goes to there. If you notice here that we have some additional ground. So we've got several other things that ground basically off of that same post. And these thick wires here, one of them goes to the fuel pumps right here. I could have grounded them somewhere else, but I mean, it's a foot away. Why bother? I'll just run it all the way to the main grounding lug. And then the other one of these is a -12 oxygen-free wire that runs all the way up to the under dash grounding, which I'll show here in a minute. And that is the star point for all of the ECU stuff. So essentially, it lets us get a really good ground to the ECU without having to rely purely on the unibody for it. I've done that in this car, and I don't really have a lot of ground reference or ground noise, ground reference issues or ground noise, I should say. But just to be safe, it's not difficult to do. Just do it, and it's a little bit easier to deal with. This main power here, this is the battery cable that runs up to the front. That is a 0 gauge, I think. Nope, it's a 4 gauge. Yeah, there we go, right there. 4 gauge. So I've had zero problems with charging and starting on this. Now, mind you, this is a nice cable. This is, I believe, a welding cable, essentially, is what they call it. But it's a very flexible, high copper content, lots of wires. I don't want to nerd out too much here, but if you're familiar with how electricity flows on wires and why high wire counts can be important due to the skin effect of how electricity moves, this is a good wire. So if you use cheap wire, you need a big wire. If you use good wire, this one's fine. So we do have a 250 amp mega fuse and a nice little fuse holder here, and that comes straight off the battery. The only other thing that comes off here, again, is a lead that runs over the fuel pumps, and they're fused in this little, I can't remember if that's an Eaton or a little fuse. I think that's a Eaton housing. This has a couple of fuses in it. This is just fusing the two fuel pumps. So again, it's right in the trunk. It was easier to just run it instead of pulling it out past fuse. So it's got a separately fused setup. But this just essentially makes sure that if something goes terribly wrong under the in the run up to the front fuse distribution area, that it doesn't burn the car down. It just blows this fuse. I would suggest if you do this kind of thing that you keep a spare in the car. Because, you know, it sucks if you blow this, and the proper solution is not to jam it with a screwdriver to make it work, as opposed to what you might see on like roadkill. The other thing we've got here, while we're back here, this is an ECU Master Dual H-Bridge. This runs my Tesla parking brakes. So the car has electric parking brakes from a Tesla in it, and this is what controls them. So there is a CAN data bus that runs up to the front and is controlled by a keypad and an Arduino. So this has a bunch of logic in it that runs a bunch of it, but I've got an Arduino that helps maintain state. This doesn't have memory in so much as it doesn't know what its last state was. So I use an Arduino to track the last state. And then there's just a little bulkhead connector right here that it uses to get down under the car that runs to the brakes. So next we'll go show some of what's under the dash. All right, so this is my glove box, and it's not really a glove box. It's really more just a fuse box, but there's a couple things in here. So what we have here is a total of 4 fuses that are actually active, and these fuse ECU ignition, ECU battery power, HVAC battery power, so like the stereo and stuff, and I think gauge battery power. So there's not a lot in the car that needs a low amperage battery fuse, but that's what these do. Everything else is actually, all of my ignition switch sources are controlled by an ECU master PDU, which we'll get to in a second. And then this collection of relays is to run my power windows. So basically these are set up in like a dual H-bridge format. So, you know, this pair right here, these two are one window, another window, another window, another window. So each window requires two relays because you have to do a flip-flop. So, and then each of those fuses is to control the window. They're different sizes because the different window motors are different sizes and they need different fuses, and the wiring lengths are different, yada, yada. So then kind of buried underneath here, if you look, if you see that Deutsch connector with all the black wires coming out of it, and you can maybe just barely see, that is a ground distribution block. So that is the primary grounding point for all of my ECU and main chassis power stuff. Basically all of the sensitive electronics, things like headlights and stuff, are grounded to the frame where they sit. But all of my sensors and controls, stereo, all that kind of stuff is all grounded out of this. And if you remember from the trunk, there was a 12 gauge nice wire that ran up to here. So that runs up to here, and then it also grounds to the chassis up here as well. So that ground of the battery is just to try to keep any noise off the ground reference, get any ground loops out of it, etc., etc. So that's the glove box. And then if you remember in the trunk, I mentioned keep a spare fuse. This is a 60 amp. This is for something that I'll show you in a second, but I've got a 250 amp sitting in here as well. And again, it's good to have some spare fuses just in case you blow them, because otherwise you'll get stuck. So just a second, we'll show you what's under the dash. All right, so we're under the hood now, and I was hoping you'd be able to see it, but I think it's buried amongst all my AC lines and stuff. The little bit of red wire you see right down here, that is the starter wire, so that comes through a bulkhead, and that's just the starter solenoid wire off the ignition switch. And then we come around, buried way down there, somewhere you can't quite see, there is an alternator, and that is an aftermarket alternator. It's a 180 amp, 220 amp. It's a lot of amp. I think it's a 220 amp alternator. It's self-exciting, so I don't have to control it with the ECU. It just made life a little bit easier. So it's a really nice piece. I've been pretty happy with it, and it was, like I said, it was just simpler to deal with, and it can handle lots of RPM and things. So I have an F1. This engine is originally an F-150 based engine, so it was also, I could get it to work right pulley wise and offset wise to fit with my F-150 front cover, which is something to keep in mind if you're doing one of these. But yeah, that's basically it under the hood. Like I said, there's not a lot really interesting here. My cooling fan is a Volvo part, and there is actually, it has its own separate ground and power. It's kind of buried down here. I don't think we can really see it much, but it's got its own little fuse and control system there. It is obviously controlled by the Haltech. And so next we'll go through some of the engine controls and how all that works. So that'll be next. All right, so back in the interior, we're going to go through a bunch of the engine controls and how this is all set up to work, the various things we have in here, and what we use for engine management and control and stuff. So I've got a Haltech IC7. We'll kick on the ignition here, and you'll see it wake up. There it goes. So this is a really nice little part. I think their pricing is excellent, and it's got a really nice feature set. I do wish I could make it, I wish I could customize a little bit more than I can. I'm hoping that's a feature they add later, but still a really nice part. And then down here we have our CAN bus keypad. So I covered this a little bit when I was talking about the ECU master system, but it's been extended for other things. So again, these button symbols don't mean anything. I need to change them. But this is the parking brake setup. So there is a Arduino underneath this center console, and it remembers the last state of the parking brakes by tracking it. So right now the parking brake is set, and I know because this red button, which you can pretend has a picture of a parking brake logo on it, the red means that it's set, and that's just to go, hey stupid, your parking brake's set. And if I want to release it, I press this button here, and it turns green, and that's the release. And you can't see it, but the car actually rolled back about an inch because it released it, and you might have been able to hear the Tesla parking brakes release. So those are electronic brakes. If I want to change it to set, this is purposely done this way, so now that it's released, this button stays green. If I want to set it again, I have to press that to acknowledge it, and then I set that again, and to set the parking brake. So it's quiet there, maybe you can hear them running. It takes, I don't know, about 1.5 seconds, 2 seconds from the fully set. And the same thing, if I want to release them again, I press this again to acknowledge that they've been set and do this. This is basically just so that I can't bump one of these while driving and accidentally set the parking brake. That would not be optimal. Now, if I do press the button somehow and get through the sequence to do it, all I have to do is tap it and it'll stop moving. And like I said, it takes about a second. So I have a moment before it is going to like try to lock up the rear wheels, but it's just a safety precaution here. So that's what those two buttons do. This one, that is a scramble boost for the Haltech. This is traction control disable. This one is a reset for the ECU, just in case, or for the power management unit, the ECU master PMU. Just in case I have a circuit that I want to force a reset on it, that button will do it. This is the horn, beep. These 4 buttons here are for cruise control. So I'm waiting on one more part for my Haltech. This turns on cruise control, that cancels it. So if you notice, I tried to roll up the windows there. If you notice, it turns that off. This is set/excel. This is resume/decel. And then again, this is off. This is AC, hence it is blue. And this one is hazards. So when I hit that, you see the hazards are blinking. So that's my hazards light. So that's what the keyboard here does. Up above this, we have a little billet panel I made that does all kinds of fun stuff. So this and this, these first 2 knobs, these are Haltech trim pots. So these allow me to change mapping in it. They both have 12 positions. And again, this is going to get stickers and some things made that list what everything does. So that's what all these cutouts and spots are for. I just have not done that yet. It will also either get painted or anodized black. This is HVAC. So that is my cooling fan low, medium, high. You can hear it going. And then this is blower motor, or I'm sorry, this isn't blower motor. This is direction. So this is foot, center, and mix to defrost. So this essentially controls where the vent position is. It is variable between them. And then last but not least, this sets warm versus cold. So this is a temperature set. Again, these will soon have printed surrounds around them that list what they do and a label up on the top, so that it's a little bit easier to track everything. You also can see here my center console. This is a forged carbon part that I made. It's just coated in forged carbon. This is not a wrap. This is actual carbon, but it's just on an aluminum substrate, so I did it because it looks cool. Here we have BMW power window switches. These are functional. They do what they're supposed to do. And you know, I've got 4 windows, so I've got 4 switches. And this is just a little 3D printed plate that I made just to make them stand up. It makes them a little bit easier to feel when you're trying to feel in the dark. And we have our shifter. Apparently this is an interior tour as well as a electronics tour, but this is our S1 sequential shifter. And it's a really cool part. We'll go through another time kind of how all that works, but it's pretty neat. I really like it. It's a good investment. It makes the car pretty entertaining to drive. Gauge-wise here, I've got a turn signal light that's stuck on. I don't know why. The turn signal's not stuck on. This is something in the gauge wiring I'm still trying to figure out. But these are Speed Hut gauges. This is a modified factory 66 Ford cluster. It's called the camera case style cluster. But it was modified to hold all these Speed Hut gauges. So I have oil pressure, speed. This car will not go 200. Or at least I won't go 200. Tachometer. With the Coyote, the 8,000 RPM limit is tantalizingly achievable. So we'll see about that. And then we've got water temperature and fuel level. I don't run anything else because, again, I can get all that data on the Haltech IC7 here, and I'd rather see the data that the ECU sees. So even if a sensor loses its mind, I'd rather that the ECU, I know that it's the one that the ECU did. So something we'll kind of take a quick glance at here. This is, ignore the ugly looking braces. They are ugly but effective, but that is a GM electronic power assist steering box, and I have a controller up under the dash that manages it. It's actually torque sensing, so it knows how much torque you're putting on something. And down here we've got a GM drive-by-wire throttle pedal. That is the Cadillac CTS pedal. And then we've got a set of Willwood style reverse swing brakes, brake and clutch pedals. There are master cylinders up under the dash there behind the gauges. And then over here with that little light you see, that is a Haltech Elite 2500. We've also got a couple of their expansion boxes. Those are under the dash back behind this. There's an IOA and IOB box because Coyotes with twin turbos use up lots of inputs and outputs. So we'll go look at the under hood side of everything. All right, back under the hood again. So this is there's plenty of people that do much nicer harness work than I do, but it's a fairly nice harness setup here. So we are all mil spec and or race spec connectors. So we've got a 61 pin on this side and a 55 pin on this side. Again, there's a lot of wires to run 4 cams and variable valve timing and all the sensors and everything I run. So it was important to do that. So these are then all mil spec wiring. All of the wiring is Raychem, and everything is booted and epoxied, as you can see here. We've got zip ties for improved strain relief. And then all of the main harness is end-to-end completely sealed. But the breakouts, obviously, there's places where I have factory connectors that I did not want to pot and pigtail. So I just do a Deutsch connector or a barrel connector that breaks out and then connects to those. So that allows me to keep the main harness really, really nice. And then I just have these smaller harnesses. So if I ever tear one of those up, it's a little bit easier. It's very modular and I can rework it. So this is an Improved Racing. I don't know if you guys are familiar with them, Michael Iron stuff. It's really, really nice. Highly recommend it. This is an oil filter relocation as well as a thermostat for my oil cooler in the front of the car. And then I've got pickups for 2 pressure sensors here. One is for the gauge, one is for the ECU. I mentioned in another video, the one that's for the ECU right now is kind of a cheapie. I've got a new one coming for that. And we've got intake air temperature post intercooler. And then we have another intake air temperature that is post turbo before intercooler. And then, as I mentioned here, we've got a fuel pressure sensor. We have a stock drive-by-wire throttle body from a Ford, from this car. From the truck that it came from. And then we've got a Wiggins style clamp here that comes up to the intercooler with our blow-off valve. And then again, we've got modularized connectors that run out to all the coils and then run out to all of the injectors. I modularized these kind of this specific way. So again, that's what these here are, and these here are. This is one bank, this is the other bank. They actually cross over from the sides. This was set up this way, so if I ever go to like an IGN 1A or change to a different style of injector, I don't have to run adapters. I just rebuild this little section of harness out here, or out this way, I should say. And I don't have to redo a whole bunch of harness, and I don't have to use adapters. So it just gives us flexibility, allows me to change things later. And then everything else is basically just normal Coyote stuff, just with pretty nice wiring. Again, everything's twisted, everything's labeled, everything is nicely zip tied and controlled so that none of them can get into hot bits or spinny bits, because that's not good. And then the last Haltech part we've got up here, we've got a WB2, so I've got to do a wideband on this. I need to put a little plug in that side so it doesn't get full of shmoo. But yeah, that's basically the entire chassis electrical system. And we'll go through kind of how the interior is laid out outside of the stuff I already showed here in just a moment.